Hi, I'm Will Kemp and I'd like to welcome you to this mini course with acrylics. We're going to do some still life paintings very simply. Everyone will be able to follow easy at home, so let's get started with a colour ground. Often when beginners start, they always have a white canvas, and when you've got this white canvas you think, oh, that's brilliant, I can get started straight onto that. But it's a really common mistake. This is because it's so hard to judge your tones when you're working against the white canvas. What we're going to be creating is what's called a tone ground. So here's a tone ground that I've already prepared. You can see how different it is to the white, and this can be so important when you're painting. It's a classical technique. Turner used to use it and Rembrandt, and it can be really, really important to get you started when you're painting with acrylics. The same technique can be used in oils, but today I'll show you how quick and easy it is with acrylics. Okay, let's get going. So what I've got here, because I paint a lot of paintings, a lot of different coloured grounds, this is just a pre-mixed colour of raw umber and white. I often use an earth colour because it's so tonal, it's really good just to get that neutral feel to your painting. So either a burnt umber or a raw umber or a yellow ochre can be really nice to get started on. If you're doing like a sunset or something with a lot of light coming behind it, yellow ochre can be absolutely brilliant. But because of this one's quite muted and the subject has got a muted grey background, we're going to be using the raw umber and white umber mix. So the paints that I'm using are golden acrylics. These are all artist quality acrylics. And you'll find with artist quality acrylics, they've just got a lot more body and a lot more opacity to them. Often when you first start painting, you buy the cheapest paints that you can buy because you feel that you're not ready to go with that real, the artist quality. You say, I'll wait till I'm better and then I'll invest in the artist quality. But I always urge my students to invest in an artist quality white. It can make such a difference to your work because you'll be able to cover over your mistakes, which is a really, really good thing when you're first starting. And it would just make acrylics work so much better than if you have the student quality. So all I've done here is I just mixed the raw umber and the white together, and you just want a consistency that is a little bit thinner than how it comes out of the tube. So I just grab a bit of water onto it. Now if you've got a pipette or you're very careful at pouring some out, you can pour some out, but I'll probably make a mess, so I'll just take it a little bit at a time. Okay, that's looking nice. Now I use a decorator's brush for just covering over the white. This is a brand called a Purdy brush, and I found them really, really excellent brushes. They never ever lose hairs, they're really sturdy, and they get a nice little case that keeps the brush all kind of neat and tidy, so you can get quite obsessional with your brushes. So I recommend a Purdy. You can see this was probably about 5 years old, so it's got quite a lot of use out of it. So I always dip the brush to start with, just in some water, but just dip the ends. And then with some kitchen roll, I just dampen it off, so that it's damp but not wet. This is key really. So you've got a bit of movement and you see how all the bristles all go together. It's so important. And when we work with the rest of the painting, the same principle applies. I dip the bristles in a little bit with the water, dampen them off with the kitchen roll, and then we can get painting. Often when you're starting, the tendency is to you push the brush in and get more paint on the handle than you do on the end of the brush. But if you ever noticed how a decorator decorates your home and they just dip the brush into the paint, this is the exact same principle. And if you start painting in this way, you'll get really professional results. So I'm just kind of scrubbing it in. If it doesn't flow as well, just add a bit more water. But what is quite key is you don't have it too thick. It's better to be watery rather than a thick paint, because this means that the paint can stick on top of it, the other layers that we do. You don't want to lose the tooth of the canvas too much. And then when I lay that flat, I always work the same way just to finish it off. You see how that gives us this nice flat tone to work our paintings on top of. Okay, that's the first stage done. So once we've got our colour ground, all you need to do is a simple pencil drawing, just so you've got a basis to work to. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate, just the real basis to get us started. So on here on the lemon, I'm just using a 4B pencil, but a 4B or a 3B pencil is absolutely great, because you want it to just make a mark on the canvas, but not have to go in too strong, not have to go in too heavy on the canvas, or it will kind of dent the canvas. You just want to be able to make a mark, but not go too heavy, because you don't want too much graphite on the canvas. So sometimes I draw on and then, just rub your finger over it, just so it softens it in, so you can still see what you're working to, but you haven't got a very, very dark pencil line. Okay? Now what I do in my paintings is I establish the darkest dark and the lightest light. This is really key and really works well when we've got a tone ground. So the two colours I'm going to use are burnt umber and titanium white. So as before, I'm just going to dip the brush into the water. I'm just using a round brush to start with. And what I do is I have a look at the picture, and it's advisable if you just squint your eyes slightly at the image. And this is really handy in whatever painting that you're doing. If you just squint down, what you'll find is the darkens darken, the lightens lighten, and all the midtones just kind of flatten out a bit. And you can see what's called like the general feel of a painting, the general feel of the image. And it's so important when you're just trying to get started in your painting. So when I squint at this image and look for the darkest part, it's this part here, the shadow area. So I'm just going to start with a shadow area on the lemon. So because this is the first layer, I can afford to be a little bit watery. Where it gets lighter towards the edge, you're trying to keep things as simple as possible. The fewer paints that you use and the less things you have to worry about, the better your chance of success of actually getting to the easel and getting the painting going. So I just dip in a little bit more water. I often keep a bit of kitchen roll just in my hand, and you can just dampen it off, and then I just kind of wash it in. See how it goes thinner? And then I use my fingers a lot in my painting, especially with acrylics, because sometimes you get a hard edge and your finger is the perfect thing just to blend it out, just to soften that edge off. So I've got the shadow line in here, and it's quite dark underneath where the lemon is just turning into the shadow. So I'm just going to, wash a bit over the top. Okay, for the darks, that's it. That was easy, wasn't it? we should all have reached this stage so far. Okay, now we're going to go with the white. So I'm just going to swap brushes. And I'm using a filbert brush. A filbert brush means that it's has got a curved edge to it. This is nice because it means that when you're blending, you can kind of just feather it onto the edge of the canvas and you'll get a nice blend. If you're trying to get a more realistic effect, a filbert is very handy to use. So again, just dip into the water a bit. Now I'm looking for the whitest white. So I'm going to grab the titanium white. So it's slightly watered down. You see how now what we've got is what's called a tonal range, our darkest part and our lightest part. And now we can start to judge the other tones in the picture. So for here, the easiest thing to do is to start on the foreground because it's quite close in tone to this already, and we can just use the two existing colours that we've got. So you can be quite sketchy, you know, with acrylics, and you can kind of work over them very, very easily. But what is so nice about the tone ground, you start to see these little parts here, these little specks of that underlying colour coming through, and it will still make the picture feel like a whole without you having to worry about finishing every single part of the painting. It helps you loosen up and just kind of paint with a bit more expression. Now what you can see starts to happen is because we're painting the outside of this, we're painting the negative of the positive of the lemon, suddenly we're starting to get that form come out. We haven't really done much, we've just, you know, done a few brush marks and a tonal ground, as if by magic this, so let's carry on. If you're finding when you're working that you're too tight, you know, you're very, you know, try and get a lot of details, instead of holding your brush this way, you can hold it on an underhand grip. This gives you a lot less control, and it'll feel a bit odd to start with, but it can be quite nice for like doing like more kind of scrubby effects because you just haven't got that control. Because we're quite close to this background colour on the actual image, all you can use is a bit of the paint that we used before, a bit of the ground colour. And this is going to be really handy that we can mix into it as well, because it's got that nice grey tone to it, like a greeny grey. The one thing you'll notice with acrylics, and this is key to remember when you're first starting, is that even though this is the same colour, when it goes on wet, it looks lighter than when it dries off. And you'll find the cheaper the paints that you use, the more there is what's called a colour shift. So it's just something to be aware of, that if you match your colour absolutely precisely, there's going to be a slight darkening when it's on your actual painting. Okay, for this stage of the painting, that's all we need to do. Now we need to add some yellow. Okay, so what we're going to do next is introduce some yellow. I'm going to use a cad yellow light. This is a really great yellow. It's got a real punch to it, and it's got quite a nice opacity, so it'll be able to cover over what we've got. Often with some yellows, like lemon yellow or Hansa yellow, they're man-made yellows, so they're very translucent. So for what we're doing at this stage of the painting, you need to try and get a more opaque yellow. The other colour I'm going to use is a raw sienna. This is an earth colour, so it's got that nice muted tone. But you'll notice on here, this is often on artist quality paints, you'll find this out, is they put an actual colour swatch, a swatch of the paint onto the paint tube. So you can see here, it's got a swatch over the black lines, and this shows you how opaque or how much coverage the actual pigment has got. So you'll see with the raw sienna, it's not a very opaque pigment, it's quite translucent. So for the technique we're going to use today, it's going to be perfect. So because acrylics dry so quickly, you can work on them in layers. And what we're going to now look at is what's called a local colour. And this is a local colour of a subject. So if you had a red car, you'd say that had a local colour of red. So if you have a lemon, you'd say this has got a local colour of a yellow. And if you look closely at here, you see there's this very, very bright, very vibrant yellow that's kind of coming underneath, you know, the skin. So what I'm going to do is just block in this part of the lemon with just the pure cad yellow. I see how wrong it looks to start with, but that's okay. You've got to trust me on this. And you see how it's quite watery again, how I'm just scrubbing it in. So I don't want too many hard edges at the bottom area, so I just kind of break that up with my finger. So it's covered it, but it's not completely solid. You don't want it to go too strong, otherwise it will look too, well, a bit too lemony. Which seems odd considering we're painting a lemon, but it's actually, on this image, it's quite an orangey lemon. So we'll wait that to dry off for a bit. When I wait for that to dry off, I'm just going to paint in around here, you know, the lighter area here. I'm just going to use the titanium white and a touch of the raw sienna. I'm just going to tone it down a bit with our background ground colour that we've mixed. So I'm just adding little bits of white where I can see how where the light is hitting it, you know, so on this edge, so that can go a little bit lighter. Okay, I'm just going to wait for this to dry off a second, and then I can paint some of the raw sienna on top. Okay, so now that's dried off, we can start to put some of the warmer raw sienna on top of that. And to start with, we're just going to use it straight from the tube. So you see, because it's got that translucent nature, I get some of the pigment underneath, some of the first yellow we put on coming through, and I'm just going to leave it when it gets to the edge, just so it's got a bit more glow on the edge. And then you can start to add the yellow to it for any areas that you just feel just need lightening a bit. So we're just trying to keep quite a limited palette for you to start with, just to get used to working with acrylics and getting used to creating a nice balanced painting. So for the finer line, I might just use this larger brush, but if you want to, I'll show you with the smaller one actually, is you can swap between, often I swap between, you know, a round brush for details and then, you know, the filbert for kind of blocking in and for more general tones. See, I'm using that quite watery and just kind of washing it on. Okay, now to block in some of this colour. It's quite dark, it's darker than you may think. I'm just going to use a bit of that ground colour that we've had, that grey, that green, and then we'll just tone it down a little bit. So often when I'm painting, I'll kind of block in areas, even if I think they're not exactly right. It just gives your eye a better idea of what the painting's, how it's going to turn out. You notice that it gets to this corner, it gets a little bit warmer, so we can add a bit more of that raw sienna. And then lighten some of the other parts. So now when this has dried off a little bit, you start to work over parts of this. And then we just want to get it so it's darker on this shadow line, so it feels more like it goes darker into the picture. Now if we get into these parts, you just want a more subtle blend, so it just feels like it feathers around a bit. I'll often use glazing liquid. You see, this is a very, very well used pot. So it's really, really handy, this glazing liquid. This is from Golden Acrylics. It might run down a bit here because I usually have the palette on the flat, but you'll get an idea. And this just keeps your paint slightly wetter for longer. But it means that you can blend two colours together rather than trying to blend them with water, because water on here, you know, it will just kind of run down, especially if you're standing up working as an easel. So this is very handy, and you can just feather it over, and then you can use your finger if you want. And you see how it kind of softens the edge, so it just kind of blends into the background. Now when you start to get your painting to this stage, you can now start to look at the painting as a whole to see which parts you want to tweak and start to add some of these little highlights that you can see onto the lemon. So when you get to this stage of the painting, it's often nice just to have a step back and have a look at the image that you're working from or the object that you're working from, and just to kind of have a look at how it's feeling as a whole. Now, when I look at the image that we're working from here, I can see there's elements of other colours. There's like a bluer colour down here, and there's redder colours on the bottom of the lemon. But for this painting, I want to try and keep it as simple as possible so you can get some really good results without getting put off by too many colours to start with. So I'm just going to work this to a finish just with these colours that we've got here, and then on the next painting I can show you some more details and more tricks how to get a more finished, realistic look. So the first thing I notice when I have a look back is that this line is very hard. So I'm just going to soften that off a bit. So there's odd little bits of reflection. This is just with the white slightly toned down with the raw sienna. Just notice this shape here is a touch out. I'm just going to lighten around the back part of this lemon. It would just help to bring it forward a little bit. Okay, and this is just, I'll probably leave this one there because it's very sketchy, just to get you used to working with acrylics and get started on this little course. Okay, let's move on to the next painting.